Fellow members, good morning. It's the appointed time. We formed a quorum, so we'll start the meeting of the panel on welfare services. Item 1, information papers issued since the last meeting. Members, please note that after the last meeting, we have received 2 information papers. One is a joint letter from Alvin Young and Jeremy Tam requesting the panel to hold a joint meeting with the panel on transport to review support measures for traffic accident victims. The second paper is on the Fujian Scheme. Mr. Alvin Young and Mr. Jeremy Tam are not here, so there is no way we can discuss it now, but it's been tabled. Items for discussion at the next meeting. It will be held on the 9th of April, a Monday, 10:40 a.m. 4 proposed items for discussion: the work of the Women's Commission and the Equal Opportunities Commission in the implementation of Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in the Hong Kong SAR. Second item, providing extra allowance to recipients of Social Security, Low-Income Working Family Allowance and Work Incentive Travel Subsidy Scheme, and one-off grant to students in need to support learning. Third item, policy to deal with domestic violence. And the fourth item, welfare support for the homeless, particularly MAC refugee, which has been a hot topic recently. Any views on this arrangement, please? If not, then these will be the 4 items for the next meeting. Now, the government has submitted an information paper on the Fujian Scheme, so I'm now suggesting that the relevant item be taken out from the list of outstanding items for discussion. And also, there has been the setting up of the subcommittee to follow up on issues relating to the unified screening mechanism for non-refoulement claims, and it has started its work. So I propose that item, that is item 40, be deleted from that list. Any views on this? Okay, if not, then we will delete these 2 items. Then item 3, follow up on the Law Reform Commission report on child custody and access and related support measures. Can we now invite the administration team to join us, please? On this item, there are 2 papers. One is from the Secretariat, and then the other paper is provided by the administration. All members of the LegCo have been invited to discuss this item. Before we go into our discussion, let me welcome Dr. Law Chi Kwong, Secretary for Labour Welfare, Ms. Liania Tai, Deputy Secretary for Labour and Welfare, and AD SWD Fong Man Chong, and also PAS from LWB, Kenneth Zhang, and Ms. Karen Chan, the PAS for HAB. So let's start right away with the Secretary briefing us on the paper. Thank you, Chairman. Several years ago, the LWB has done some consultation on this proposed legislation. We have received views on this. Around 1/3 are in support and 1/3 are against, and another 20% of the respondents consider the proposed legislation can be implemented after only additional resources have been allocated. And in 1617, the panel on welfare services have passed 2 motions asking that the government to put up more support measures before going into the proposed legislation. Because of the divergent views and also the panel's stance, we propose not to introduce the proposed legislation into the LegCo at this stage. And at the same time, we propose to, as a matter of priority, increase resources in 2018-19 to strengthen measures. First, there is this visitation center. We will enhance it, and 5 centers will be set up for divorced families. And also, the resources will be allocated to the IFSC, Integrated Family Service Center, and then also additional resources will be allocated to the FCPSU's Family and Child Protection on Service Units, which number 11. We will also be strengthening publicity on parental responsibility. And at an appropriate time in the future, we will look at the stakeholders' views towards proposed legislation where there have been changes in attitude, and if needed, we will look into whether we would introduce the proposed legislation into the electoral again. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Fernando Zhang Punxiuping would like to speak on this subject. Any other member would like to speak? Well, if not, then 4 minutes each. Dr. Fernando Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. On the co-parenting, parental responsibility, or access rights and so on, together with groups, concerned groups on domestic violence, we have been very concerned about this proposed legislation. And for families with domestic violence, under the new legislation, their conflicts will continue, and there will be more litigation in the future. I know that you will not proceed with the proposed legislation for the time being, and you are adding in a new contact service. And this is something good. A piece of good news for these concerned groups. We know that the Bar Association and the Law Society, the two legal professional bodies, would very much like to reform or overhaul the legislation. This is what they call the Children's Bill in English. In other words, the bill or the legislation should be very much child-focused, taking the best interest of the child into account, and that includes allowing, during the course of the legal proceedings, children, the underage children, can have legal representation. And through legal aid procedures, the children can be helped. They could have independent legal representation. And also, the courts should listen to children's voices. That should be included in the law. A law can never be perfect. When we are updating the law, these are the new concepts being floated. And there is also the concept of co-parenting and parental responsibility and so on. And the government is not going to proceed with the legislation, but will the government consider, say, looking at the advantages of the proposed legislation, including, say, a child-focused approach? How can that be implemented? Would you talk to the judiciary about the legal proceedings? Say, for example, whether the judges and the legal officers should take reference from best practice directions, which should incorporate such factors, so that children's voices and children's well-being are the prime considerations for making decisions. So this is well, I'll go down. I will have one question at a time. Secretary, please.
Chairman, I believe that the chairman and the government and the legal associations have pretty much see eye to eye. So the legislation will be introduced at a suitable time. That how to achieve for joint custody, that how they clearly describe the law for the child-based interest. These are all pretty important. However, after finishing the consultation, we think that especially Dr. Fernando Cheng said that many organizations, especially concerned about the domestic violence, have a lot of concerns whether this draft bill will lead to more frequent occurrence of violence. So after discussion with the relevant law associations, so I think conceptually or in operation, it should not have such problems. Since there are still such concerns in sort of education and publicity or in interpretation in the court, I believe that would be the key. I think we need more time to let the society know that these amendments would be serve the best interest of the child. As for whether in the practice notes or during the legal proceedings to consider the interests of children, Chairman, I cannot provide some concrete response to Dr. Cheng. From my past understanding, the judges, when considering especially the issue of custody, they usually think of the well-being of the child as the main factor. However, usually the ruling may not to everyone's satisfaction. So these line of work will need to be explained to the public more frequently. I believe that in domestic violence cases, the victims were very concerned as well. So if there inadequate support, just explain to them may not able to dispel their doubts. So the current strategy that we have to step up the support work, so there will be more publicity and education. I will get in touch with the Law Society, so they're very willing to do more this line of work for more communications to let the public understand the concepts between the law, that how they would best benefit the child. That will take time. If we introduce the legislation too hastily, if we're not able to dispel the public doubt, that will be counterproductive. That would be our current strategy. Well, Dr. Cheng, so the support is of course important, but once the court has made a ruling that will affect the future relationship. So before amending the law, so for the interim, so what can be done that can lead to further improvements? I think the administration can look into that, and the two law associations have offered plenty of views, and I have listened extensively that the updating the law is to manifest in putting the child first. Without the legislation, there's still room to achieve that. I suggest the administration to take an extra step so that for the interim period, these arrangements can be take place. So we can discuss this till 11:25. So we have quite a bit of time. So maybe we can hopefully get more response. So we can look into what can be done. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you, Chairman. I agreed to step up the services. Looking at the paragraph 4 of the document, that you will draft the main provisions of the legislations for public reference so as to enhance the understanding of the parental responsibility model in legal terms. We also hope to clarify the doubts on the practical impact of the proposal on divorced families. Of course, you mentioned that you will consult the stakeholders on the proposed legislation. Just want to follow up that, of course, you will need more time. Does the government have any estimate that when you consult the stakeholders, if they're not supporting the administration, what will you do? A second question on the pilot project on children contact service. Last time I visited the Hong Kong Family Welfare Society Center. So you're currently assessing the effectiveness. Of course, you hope that you can regularize this program. I would like to know when will the findings of the assessment evaluation come out. For Paragraph 6, the 2018-19, the budget had just unveiled, and to set up the 5 centers for divorced families. I'd like to ask, do you have a timetable and the manpower? So you've decided on the location. So I wonder if you can disclose the manpower and the as soon as possible, deployment as soon as possible. So it depends on when we approve the estimates, and then we will go on at full speed. So the earliest for the existing centers, they could have additional power by the end of this year. But for the support centers, it will take more time because we need to identify suitable premise for these services. However, we hope that within the 2018-19 financial year, the relevant services can be implemented. As for the review of the pilot project, so maybe late this year or early next year. So I will take about 1 year. So the quickest will be 2020 to look into it. At the last consultation, the document very close to the actual provisions. So if absent of any major variation, if we after we implement the major increased support, so you can see the effectiveness depend on the stakeholder response. Of course, we'll come back to the welfare panel, and then we'll make a decision. So it's therefore very difficult to offer a detailed timetable. So maybe we can think about 2020 as likely. However, as we all know, that 2020 will be a legislative election. So we have to very much look at the timing. So since I've assumed office, the women's organization I've been in contact with is very concerned that how the support services can be improved. So I believe that the times ahead to see that how we use our resources to improve existing services. So, Mr. Poon, I'd like to follow up on. Are you like to write a review on the HKFWS? Well, I don't think we should wait for the review. So for the views we've collected, that it just can't be a child access-centered. Support service need to be offered as well. So the budget had explained as well that we have to really elevate to a support center and expand to 5. So the preliminary views think that the service is good, but just not enough. So we need to put more resource into it. Mr. Kok Wei Kyung. So when we have a huge financial surplus, and yet there is so different mixed views and issues, and hope the Secretary understand that money doesn't solve all problems. So for the visitation rates, in the document you mentioned that you can offer resources to set up 5 centers and for recruiting the manpower. But can money really solve problems? I think we're still to look at other things. Firstly, well, divorce we had a lot of relationship issues, as well as making rational decisions. So it's not a matter of you telling in public you have such services, then they will approach the center proactively. Well, in Chinese culture, marriage is important, and like the Western society, I will use the word casual to describe their view of relationships. There are a lot of issues need to be addressed. So when it comes to divorce, the couples are pretty much breaking apart. To bring them back together and to sit down to discuss in a calm manner, the environment is set and the settings is important. Our culture background is important, and how to make the divorced parents to take co-parenting and sharing parental responsibility seriously. That will take time, and they will need some counseling as well. So these visitation centers not only play the role of managing children access rights, they need to deal with also their marital status or their family status, or the family circumstances rather. I hope that we can be more in depth. in detail. So if the couples themselves are falling out with each other, and then there is a issue with maintenance, so if they dispute on the maintenance, so we heard from the sector that they don't even want to sit down to talk about it. So we need to work harder to see how can we improve so that the parents can that we need to have to create a better atmosphere for a discussion. We can't just offer it like a routine service and see that there's a solution. And some organizations said that the 5 district visitation centers they were different in size and so on, or maybe if the government property agency, we can offer permits for them instead of renting in the private market. Secretary, please. For the actual detailed work, I think we pretty much relied on the family and child protective service centers units, and for the divorcing or divorce cases, the FCPSU, if necessary, will provide support. So for those cases, even though the FCPSU, we're giving a lot of names, one of them would be fighting unit or unit, so on. So a lot of its work, well, deal with a lot of emotional support, and for the CPU social workers, a lot of them are quite experienced social workers. So I believe that the social office service of them to be undisputed without question. For other cases, they will be dealt with in the Integrated Family Service Centers, IFSC, and the latest budget will also allocate extra manpower that will also to SWD and NGOs. And for the maintenance, I will defer to HAB to discuss about their study on the maintenance board. Speaker. The HAB will appoint a consultancy through the Family Council to conduct a study on various issues in divorce fixed lottery. So last we put on tender, and last we read a proposal and estimates. So we're currently evaluating the tenders. So hopefully within the first half of this year, we can appoint a consultant to kickstart the project. The study will take 18 months. While carrying this study, we'll continue to review and launch other improvement measures. In the past, we have received the views from the social and the legal sector. So first, on the legal aid, we received some views that the director of the legal aid services about on the waiver for the monthly maintenance had not been reviewed for a long time. So we had to reviewing at full speed, and hopefully if we could adjust the amount, we can help those in need. And after finishing the review, with the second quarter of this year, we can consult the HAISP panel.
That's so much about the legal aid. And at the same time, for the SWD, it will refer CSSA cases to the legal aid department for people to chase after or recover the maintenance. So the legal aid department is looking at whether the procedures can be streamlined and cases can be dealt with expeditiously. The LAD will host seminars and talks to help enhance understanding of SWD staff to streamline the process. Now, last year, the Hong Kong Council of Social Service and the Hong Kong Baptist University have completed a study of divorced poor families, and there have been recommendations saying that the government should step up our publicity. Starting from 2000, HAB has been launching a community involvement program on maintenance. So far, we have subsidized 70 projects, and in the coming financial year, we have earmarked funds to do such publicity and publication education work. Thank you. It's now my turn, and then after that, there will be a second round, and Dr. Fernando Zhang will be asking a second round. It's my turn now, and on 2018-19, there will be enhanced support measures. Of course, we welcome these 5 centers, co-parenting support centers. But for this additional $56 million, how will it be allocated? Now, for these 5 co-parenting support centers, plus the SWDs run IFSC and FCPSUs, which come with a lot of different names and nicknames and so on. How are the resources going to be distributed among them? Now, for these support center, the operating cost is around $4 million per year. So will you adopt that as a basis for running the 5 support centers? Second, for the IFSCs run by the SWD, there will be a new supervisory post. What is its responsibility? How is a person going to help parents deal with divorces? And also, for the IFSCs and also FCPSUs, and for the NGOs IFSCs, and for the 5 centers, how are they going to coordinate among themselves so that they can really help divorced families? Later on, I will be talking maybe to the Assistant Director of Social Welfare on the exact details of the service. That would be more appropriate. But for today, I still like to seek a response from the administration on how these centers are going to operate in the future. Thank you. Chairman? We will be getting a funding of $56 million, and how are they going to be distributed? We do have some preliminary suggestions, but this is preliminary, I must stress. After the budget has been released, we will talk to the organizations and the stakeholders to talk about the overall modus operandi. Now, in the policy address, we will be committing more resources to IFSCs and FCPSUs, etc. And the sectors have a lot of views on those areas. And as what the Secretary said, there will be 5 support centers to be set up. And they will be looking at the views gathered during the pilot project. So if it is just for contact service, then it's problematic. So in the design of the support centers, we will also be incorporating elements of co-parenting work. Now, as for how they will interact with the IFSCs and FCPSUs, how is the division of work going to be like? Later on, we will liaise with the relevant stakeholders and on the details. March is a budget is a busy season for us. In any case, we have make an appointment with the relevant working group under HKCSSC to map out the details. Now, as for the operating cost, we have taken reference from the pilot project. Our initial view is that such services can be provided expeditiously. So in our proposal, well, this is our initial view, I must stress, the relevant organizations will come up with proposals on locations, and if needed, we will look at the actual needs and maybe provide rent subsidy to them. For this pilot project, in fact, a rent subsidy is being provided. How is the subsidy level going to be like? We will have to look at some other indicators to decide on that. So in terms of resources, we have already set aside funds for that. Assistant Director, please note that you haven't answered my questions. $56 million, how would that be allocated? I am just concerned that $5 million will go to SWD, only $50 million will go to SWD, $6 million will go to NGOs only. We agree that more people should be hired at IFSC, FCPSUs, but still you need to allocate a substantial amount to the NGOs. Now there are many different units, FCPSUs, IFSCs, co-parenting support centers. So there is a lot of coordination work that is entailed. So because we are talking about different departments and bureaus, we will meet with the director later on to look at how the actual operation will be like. We don't want the different departments and parties to pass the buck. I'm also concerned about rent, as raised by Mr. Kotwai Kirk. For the pilot project, the NGO is actually paying a lot for the subsidy itself. So if we can't give subsidy in rental, it's difficult for NGOs to join in providing services. Well, you've fielded several thousands of questions. I don't know what these are about, but we can give you the big amounts, the rough allocation. $56 million. That means hiring 100 professionals. You know that for IFSCs, under the SWD, the ratio is 2 to 1. And for the 5 support centers, our thinking is that they will be run by NGOs. And we know that for the 11 FCPSUs, they are going to be run mainly by the SWD. So you can come up with the calculations yourselves. We have to look at the questions raised on the budget that you have raised, and if needed, we will give you all the answers needed. First round, Dr. Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Chairman. The Women's Committee of the DAB are very concerned about divorced families. So for the Law Reform Commission report on child custody and access, our stance has been all along towards that report. We have to have enough support services before we go ahead with legislation. The government is now suspending legislative work and is willing to set up the 5 co-parenting support centers. I think the government is willing to follow good advice, and we compliment it. We hope that these support centers can really help the divorced families, the parents and the children therein. I've had several questions. First, we are very concerned about maintenance. So we've been advocating all along that a maintenance board be set up to help the divorced families, especially the single moms who will be assisted in recovering maintenance. We know that the government will conduct consultation, but the consultation period is too long, 18 months. So will we be following up on the question of maintenance? Will we hold a public hearing? Secondly, for such support centers proposed, will they provide legal support and also mediation services? We know that parents in a divorced family will have to face litigation, and we've received many people coming to us for assistance because mothers do not have to deal with litigation cases. Would support be provided to them on that regard? So these are my questions. Thank you, Secretary. Please. Dr. Quat asked about whether there will be a public hearing at the LegCo. I think it's a question for the chairman. I've answered members' questions about our study, and there will be other publicity work which will be undertaken. And on the question of maintenance, the HAB colleague has taken that already, answered that. The government is in all seriousness in tackling the problem. So that's why we are conducting a study through the Family Council on this. Now, soon after I assumed office as a Secretary for Labour and Welfare, many people have reminded me that some 10 years ago I've advocated for the maintenance board myself. But in terms of division of work, it should fall under the ambit of the HAB. We will pay close attention to issues on families and children. We will work together with them to see how things should go forward. We should help divorced families, particularly in raising their children. If enough support can be provided, then we'll do every sort of good to the growth of the child. But we know that as far as maintenance is concerned, many concerned groups have been said that there will be a lot of conflicts and a lot of problems in maintenance when it comes to families with domestic violence. So our focus is how to provide the best support. We will do it through the FCPSUs and IFSCs. So, in terms of legal aid, can adjustment be made to more effectively help divorced families to deal with their problems? The work is going on. Chairman, I asked about whether these support centers will provide legal support and mediation services. Assistant Director, Mediation Services? Assistant Director. Thank you, Chairman. We have to tread carefully on this. Why? For the 5 support centers, they will be manned by social workers. Now, if we talk about mediation services, we need professional people to do that. And social workers may not come with the right qualifications. So these are 2 separate professions. So when we talk to the sectors, we will talk to them about this. We know that some social workers do have certain mediation qualifications, but this is not a prerequisite that we have on the social workers. So we have to deal with that cautiously. And we understand that mediation services fall under the ambit of the HAB. It doesn't mean that we will not work on it because it comes under another HAB. That's not the case. But then, if we are going to regularize the services, then the services will be supervised by the SWD. And if we are supervising areas which are not really our professions, then we have to be very careful. And for, say, legal aid services, there are referral cases referral services being undertaken. So if needed, we can do that as well. Can we ask Ms. Chan from the HAB whether you will provide mediation services? Well, to my understanding, it doesn't fall under the ambit of HAB. Now, the Family Council would like earlier to find out more about this, especially about divorce issues and so on. And earlier, the Family Council and the HAB have conducted a study on divorce. And the results have been handed over to the relevant departments to take a look further. Well, you see that there are problems, right? Divorced families face a lot of different problems. Bringing up the child is a problem, parental responsibility, and then legal proceedings are another complex area. Now, if you're going to provide a support centers for divorced families, but you're not providing mediation or legal support services, I mean, then you're not doing your work effectively. Not enough services are being provided. Secretary, you said that you support the establishment of a maintenance board, but you said that it doesn't come under your portfolio. But then again, it's not the top priority of HAB. So, I mean, should this be the kind of division of work within the government? If there is a problem, can't adjustment be made? Now, I'm not saying that we should come up with a policy to promote mediation services or what. What I'm saying is that divorced families need mediation services, and for these support centers, mediators should be there to help the families. So it's not a question about policies, about provision of services. Please provide sufficient services for the divorced families.
Secretary, currently, for the IFSCs, there they have the social workers who received the relevant mediation training, and in the work environment they also provide the mediation service as well. So the SWD colleague mentioned that this is not a service requirement in asking the NGOs to provide mediation service. So we can consider it. However, the FCPSU in most cases don't play the role of mediators. However, they will assist both sides. However, they don't really offering proper mediation service per se. So the development of mediation service in Hong Kong has been over 3 decades, and the legal profession has this field mature. Usually, mediators are sometimes not lawyers, so maybe within the social service sector that we have to offer mediation as well. I can also find out that in the IFSC run by the NGOs whether this actually offered. So from the case we encounter, we haven't seen any mediation work. So if this domestic mediation is an important service, how would it to be provided? That how either it be provided by other mediators or be built in the center, or we need to train more social workers with the qualifications. I think the administration is obligated to look into it. Now that the legal trouble issues is quite important legal cases, so I think we need to consider and provide it as well. And Dr. Ferdinand Chang, second round. So a divorced families have a lot of different needs. So the HKFWS centered, I will also advocate the one-stop shop model. As for the allowance provided by provisions offered by SWE, not sufficient to provide such services. The society actually offered resources of its own. So like Dr. Elizabeth Quat has said, under what service model will be helping this divorced family, helping not only the parents, but also the child that need to be looked at independently. Now children are usually looked as as afterthought, that no one specializing to addressing their needs. So first, I still haven't hear a definite answer from the chairman. How do we allocate the $65 million? I hope you can provide us with a document. I'm worried that there will be insufficient provisions for the visitation centers besides manpower, because you can't offer just only visitation or access service. So they will also offer counseling service before and after the visits. We have to work out the service model. They will be referred to the serious crime unit or the IFSCs or the IFSCs. So how do these 3 units coordinate? So the visitations or just visitation only, and the other needs will be met by the IFSC or the FCPSUs. So we need to map up the entire service model. As for the safety of the access centers are important. So we have plenty of examples of incidents happening overseas and locally. So how can we assure the safety with design in the facilities? For example, there should be more than one entrance exit, and the waiting room will need to be more than one. There should be a buffer zone to separate the 2 parents in dispute. So this design will involve extra resources, and the only visitation center chairman we have in there as well, actually in a industrial office building in the industrial area. I wonder if these are suitable premises that offer a safe and a pleasant environment. I found it quite strange to locate in an industrial building. So for these 5 future access center, we allocate enough resources to carry out safe design. So, and then in case of accident incidents, then you claim that in the individual cases, if it's a inadequate effort, and then we be accountable for any incidents occurring. I believe that the social sector asking for at least 4,000 square foot of space. Which is considered enough for the work it required to do. Secretary, like the document has said, there's 5 centers are not just visitation centers, but actually called co-parenting support centers. So of course we need more manpower. Like Dr. Chang has said, currently there is insufficient manpower in the visitation centers. So we have to tackle this. How would it actually operate? Dr. Chang mentioned that for the visitation arrangements, for some families, especially where domestic violence have involved, safety is paramount. That we perfectly understand. The current challenges is that a lot of services looking for spaces for the CCMW, the Integrated Center for Mental Wellness, have been difficulty securing sites. So even though it's a rather unfortunate that as we have the visitation center in the industrial building, in the future we can't this location as well. Since it's just the beginning, so how would this should be run, and what is the role of the operations center? The SWD colleague had mentioned that we need to consult the stakeholders. As for the chairman's question, so what's the interfacing with the SCPSU and the IFSC that for the collaboration on cases? I believe that we need time to formulate. So it's difficult to answer the members that how we do in practice. However, we welcome comments on the interfacing and the actual operations. And since the nature of these service units are different, there will be different practice. For the same family, a different phase, maybe it's we start with the FCPSU, and later on, after separated or divorced, then they will go to the co-parenting support center. So for the actual arrangements on referral, we discussed with the sector. As for the 56 million, can you give us a document that to show how it will be allocated? Well, Dr. Chang, there must be enough resources. I'm worried that this visitation center are not safe enough. In overseas, we have all these guidelines and all the specifications and so on. We can't let it lightly, because this is a serious risk of domestic violence. Second round, I see finally there's only Dr. Elizabeth Quat, so let's draw the line there. So after Dr. Quat, we'll move to another item. Dr. Quat, please. So on the mediation service, I hope the Bureau can really explore offering domestic mediation service to help more parents. On the other hand, I care about the safety, because I know that for the family court, there also have violent behavior. A lot of a single parent, divorced mom, are really afraid to meet their violent ex-husband. From my own experience, well, during the dialogue, violence had flared up. So for the safety of the violence of the visitation centers, how to assure the safety of both parents and the safety of the children would require special resources and special design to make it work. Otherwise, you are doing bad things with good intentions. Well, if there are major issues broke out in these centers, that will be quite regrettable. As for this co-parenting support centers, my colleagues have asked, the service is quite similar to the IFSCs. So these service centers will need to offer special services for divorced families instead of just replicating the service model of the IFSCs. My question is that can you estimate when will these 5 centers be set up? Well, our Secretary have answered that if the budget is approved, he hoped that by the end of 2018, well, actually longer time to identify suitable premises. For the IFSCs and the 11 FCPSU centers, that'll be quicker because these are existing service units. And for the expansion from 1 to 5, the other 4 new centers will need to identify suitable sites. So we can't tell or offer a concrete timetable because the resource is for 2018-19. So hopefully before the start of the 2018 financial year, we can start the services. In identifying the suitable sites, so what is any sort of selection criteria for the locations? And Chairman, it's quite hard to tell at this stage. So for the location, we're listening to the sector on the suitable size, and for the hopefully for the NTS, East-West and the Kowloon East-West, we will have the new centers. For as safety will be a main concern. Simply put, we need to balance the location and the safety and various factors. If not able to a suitable location, thereby not offering the service, that will not something we'd like to see. And Chairman, for each center, how many divorced family is expected to serve? Assistant Director, on this will consult the stakeholders because for this pilot project we set the target as 135. As for February 28th, for the pilot project has done 100. As you know, for the 20-some cases, these are not visitation cases. It's just they took the extra step that before the visitation, they have done some co-parenting support because just visitation will be difficult. This is exactly we set this resource center before besides offering co-parenting, we need to also deal with the emotional and so on side and so on. So we'll discuss with the sector on a more realistic target. For the manpower, we take reference from the pilot project. However, the pilot project is for territory-wide, and the future 5 centers will have on district-based it. So it depends on the actual nature of the case. I'm quite concerned that the 5 centers, together with the SCPSUs, altogether, so how many divorced families expected served every year in total? The figures are pretty stable for the visitation cases, and for those with orders, so the new case is about 200 a year. Well, it's about 20-something thousand divorces every year. To obtain a report from the court is about 1,000 cases, and the court ordered for social worker assistance or supervision and visitation, there's about 200 cases. So that figure has been stable for the past 2 years. For the visitation centers, will do more than court-ordered cases. And for those that for which the private arrangement broke down or on the eve of divorce, or cases where they can't work out the visitation arrangements, so that we expect there will be a rise in caseload. And for the division responsibility, if the court, if the order have explicitly asking to appoint a public officer, that would not be handled by the NGOs, or a protective order cases that would deal with. So that will add this custody of procedure flow. That's really quite complicated.
So your time's up. Our frontline staff have placed emphasis on this. So this is an issue of our concern. Chairman, I only need to know our capacity. what is our capacity is. So the assistant director has said that every year the number is stable as far as court audit cases are concerned. It's difficult to come up with a figure. Can you supplement the information later? Now, we talk about safety facilities, child-based facilities. So please pay attention, make sure that you have enough funding for them to do renovation and refurbishment, which should be based, adopt a child-based approach and safety-based approach. So please incorporate that in your budget. Now, before the discussion ends, Dr. Quat has asked for a public hearing. But if to our recollection, on the 4th of October last year, we have already held a public hearing on maintenance. So it's not that long ago, and maintenance belongs to the ambit of FJB. So maybe we should hold a public hearing under the Home Affairs panel. I hope that Dr. Kwat, you will understand this. So let's move on to the next item. Thank you very much for coming. And the other item, the next item, is about the poverty line, the review of the poverty line. Some members have already raised their hands to speak. Now, on this item, there are also two papers, one from the Secretariat, the other provided by the administration. All right. Dr. Law, thank you for staying on. And then we have from the Chief Secretary for Administration's Private Office Head, Policy and Project Coordination Unit, Ms. Angelina Kwan, and Principal Economist from the Economic Analysis and Business Facilitation Unit, Ms. Reddy Ng. And then from the Census and Statistics Department, Assistant Commissioner, Ms. Iris Law. Thank you and welcome. Secretary, the administration has submitted a paper. I'll just highlight a few salient points here. You know that poverty line, that was determined by the first term of COP. That was a relative poverty which is set at the 50% of the median household income by household size. Its major function is to help us to review the effectiveness of our government work and also try to help us in improving policies to deal with the policy problem. So please understand that the poverty line is not a poverty alleviation line. And obviously, after we have set the poverty line, we found that after the government has intervened, close to half of the households are working families. So we have set up the low LIFA allowance, low income working family allowance. That was in response to the setting up the poverty line. In terms of the many welfare policies we have, we are not just helping those under the poverty line. Many of the measures are helping people, say, who are at the 60%, 70%, or even 100% of the median household income. Now, within the poverty line framework, we know that we have come up with detailed analysis which are set out in past papers. Say, in terms of the aging population and the structural factors, what are their impact on poverty line? Now, in terms of relative poverty, one of the main factors in poverty is really the distribution of income. In simple terms, it's uneven income. So if that gap widens, then the number of people under the poverty line will increase as well. So these are really a phenomenon as a result of the statistics that we compile. So we're happy to hear members' views on the review of poverty line. Pun Xiaoping, Michael Lok, Kokaki, Fernando Zhang have said that they would like to ask a question. First, Mr. Pun Xiaoping, 4 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. The Secretary has said that poverty line is not a poverty alleviation line. Now, going by our records, you have set up this poverty line in 2016. 1.35 million were considered poor people. In other words, 1 in 5 persons in Hong Kong is below that line. I know that the government acknowledged the government has done something in terms of OALA, LIFR, and CSSA. The government has done some work. But there has not been an improvement in terms of the size of the poor population in Hong Kong. Now, you said that you have taken on board a number of factors in coming up with a poverty line. It is an easy-to-understand measurement, simple and easy to understand quantitative basis for the government to look at issues on poverty. Now, through the poverty line, you can analyze the poverty situation and come up with policy to tackle the problem and review their effectiveness. Now, my first question. You are not going to change how you set the poverty line, right? But in terms of reviewing the effectiveness of poverty alleviation measures, would you have some indicators to gauge your effectiveness of your policies? Now, there is a wealth gap, that is for sure. And I don't know whether the government, once you have the poverty line, will you have important indicators for assessing important policies? Say, would you have a target of setting the number of people, setting a target for the number of people under the poverty line? And also, we talk about uneven income distribution, which has led to a poor population in Hong Kong. So I wonder whether the government would do something about the very huge wealth gap in Hong Kong. People think that the poverty problem is very serious in Hong Kong. Would the government do something about that, Secretary? Well, right now, 1.35 million poor population refers to the population pre-government intervention. But the government has come up with a lot of measures to help grassroots. So objectively speaking, how many people are under the poverty line? Well, less than 1 million. And 970,000, 960,000 people. It's on a high level. But then I would say that one of the things that I mentioned, we're talking about relative poverty. We're looking at the income, but not the asset at all. So for a number of the retirees, say if they don't have a stable income, so it's very likely that they will be part of the poor population. So how can we convert assets into stable income? That will be a very important policy that we have to think about. Now, to the population, if they have a stable income, then they will see improvement in quality of living. Say if they have, say, several $1 million in their assets and they don't have a stable income, they're reluctant to spend. And that will affect their quality of life. So how can we effectively turn their assets into a source of stable income? Now, right now, for the Hong Kong Mortgage Corporation, we do have a tool, and that is a reverse mortgage, and that is to say you hand over your property to the mortgage corporation, and then you can live there forever, and then you can earn an income. And in the short term, there will be a life annuity scheme to be rolled out in the short term. And these two measures can help the elderly people, particularly the retirees, to convert their assets into stable income. Now, in the budget, you may notice that the FS said there will be tax concessions in that regard. And one of it has to do with the life annuity schemes in the private market. The details have yet to be mapped out. In the past couple of years, there are many more life annuity schemes being rolled out in the private market. We will keep a close eye on the latest developments. So from the policy point of view, we will try to take care of the low-income families, and that was stated in the last policy address. For the liver, we are going to overhaul this system that will be turned into the working family allowance, and then we would try to do something to help the retirees. Apart from the higher level of the old ALA, which can help the low-income elderly who might not have good assets, and coupled with the reverse mortgage and life annuity scheme, we hope to be able to see a drop in the number of poor population. Next, we have Mr. Michael Look. Thank you, Chairman. The CPG, Central People's Government, talk about poverty alleviation target in 2020, and their spirit is very good. People appreciate it. Why hasn't the SAR government modeled after it? We're talking about relative poverty instead of absolute poverty. But do you have the determination to eradicate poverty? Now, in 2016, the poor population pre-intervention, the number has increased by 24,400. How come that the number has increased instead of drop? Now, in terms of statistics, you can't reach 0, but at least you should not have see the figures rising. Now, what are the policies that should be put in place? You should review first the minimum statutory minimum wage. A lot of the poor population do have work, but then they are working on low-income jobs, including government outsourced work. Now, if there is a double parents, and if one is working and he's getting just the minimum wage, then definitely he's a poor person. For a family of 3 with 2 working, if both of them get the minimum wage, I'm sure they will be considered as poor family. The baseline of $34.5 per hour is too low. That must be a review. Now, apart from the relative poverty line, will the government also consider drawing up a absolute poverty line or a subsistence living protection line, and to measure what income will be able to support a person? What is the subsistence level? Can there be a scientific indicators? In terms of calculating the poverty line now, you said that one of the issues which can't be dealt with is income from investment. Say for middle-income families, they may get good return for their investment. Can you also look at the income of this group of people from investment? Then if that is taken into account, that would be a fairer approach in setting the poverty line. Now, you are looking at the relative poverty issue now. You are looking at the pre-tax situation. There is no capital gains tax in Hong Kong. But then for this group of people, they may have good capital gains and they may take up a very large ratio of their income. Shouldn't that be factored in as well? Now, also for employment policies, how can you support the carers so that of our families, the homemakers, that they can actually join the labor market? I think that all these can help with alleviating the poverty problem in Hong Kong. Secretary, the CPGs the poverty line is set at renminbi 2,300 yen per year, and that is less than 200 yen per month. But I think the Hong Kong should take reference from more developed jurisdictions, right? And we are, like others, adopting the concept of relative poverty. Please appreciate that some information may be lagging behind. If you look at the latest report, 2016 report on the 2016 situation, even for this year, if we are going to announce some results, we are just talking about the scenario in 2017.
for the actual the impact, the likelihood that would be the life annuity scheme. Another one, the application of reverse mortgage, with as well the higher OALA, that how would they impact or as well as how to interact with one another. So the impact of the elderly may have to wait till 2019 to 2020 when we look at 2018, which will reflect the situation, because the implementation, the compilation of the figures will have a significant lag. So we're just looking at the snapshot of 2 years ago. So members asked that whether you would look at the poverty from the expenditure perspective. So every 5 years, the Census and Statistics Department, they have a expenditure survey. So last time we used that survey to evaluate the poverty situation, including the income and expenditure poverty. For this, they are of the reference value. Therefore, members asked for the statutory minimum wage, even though members claim they are lagging. So every increase, they are surpassed inflation. For the lowest 30% of the earners, the improvement in the past few years, the improvement, they have 5 to 7%, which is higher than the inflation rate. So for the income inequality, doesn't occur in the employment, but however occurred upon retirement, when we have more elderly retire from the labor workforce and they lack a stable income. So in terms of data collection, they're not able to show an accurate picture. For the investment income, we've asked in the general household survey, as for the 2016 by census, we have surveyed that all sources of income. But as you all know, that investment income is not stable. If you invest in stock, it depends on how many stocks in your portfolio. So nobody can tell that how much they make every month from their stocks. So if they have their property, then the rental income will be stable. Usually they give an accurate picture. For other investment vehicles or their income, the census is not able to provide an accurate picture. So the underestimation is significant, but we can't tell by underestimating how much. So during the survey, the presence of other family members will make a difference as well, especially for investment. Income will be a hard information to extract. But do we have any policies so as not as to increase the poor population? Well, we are determined. So by the end of this year, we're looking at 27 figures. For 2019, we look at 2018, more mid-2018 figures. I can't say for sure that the policies implemented at the moment will be demonstrated by 2020. But however, by 2021, the measures I mentioned will be shown at the poverty situation. That's the lag. So maybe by 2021, we can say with confidence that the policies we launched to ascertain the actual effectiveness. So so we have to own estimate. However, they'll be expected to depart from the reality. So can you have absolute poverty, relative poverty, as well as the subsistence living protection line to enrich the poverty line interpretation. So adopting the international poverty line definition said for per capita $1.25 U.S. standing, I believe that they have very little significance to Hong Kong. For the China figure at 2,300 RMB per year is also of low reference values to Hong Kong. So some asked whether we can use a basket of goods to do this. If you recall this a long time ago, when we set up the CSSA, so conceptually we have this basket case concept. However, the adjustment from then on only based on inflation, so it don't really reflect the actual basket of goods. However, the basket of goods is also quite relative. Depends on how the society define on the basic necessities. So that is the CSSA part. Next, we have Dr. Kwakaki. Thank you, Chairman. So referring to the government's documents, so maybe the Secretary can explain. I agreed with you that the poverty line is a lagging indicator, so you can never have an accurate estimate. However, from the beginning, by the time you produce the actual finding, though poor families affected are helpless, so you have to come up with a way that how to help them, but between the surveys. So next, the question of logic, I saw the Secretary said that the poverty line is not for poverty alleviation. I wonder what standard you're adopting. However, in the academic, in the social service sector, they have a standard that for the living standards of by household size. So some living in public housing. So, but due to the low rental, they are able to save significantly on rents. And for those who are not able to obtain public housing, the biggest cause of their poverty. So that the rent is a major expenditure, and the government has all the available data. If the government would need to help the families, the data is already available. You know the geographical distribution of the subdivided units and their rent levels. If these families, no matter what's the size of the household, they can accurately report their rental levels. If they're not adopting to relative poverty line, so there are tens of thousands of people living in SDOs. So using the household expenditure on rent, if you're not able to afford not able to allocate public housing, they're able to spend even half or 60% of their rent income on rent. So you can help this family. You won't call it a rent allowance, or maybe it's called a basic living allowance. This is different to the working family allowance. So they're working or not is not important. They have to survive first. If the government stick on this, that we're pushing the families to perish. I saw the government include the assets, elderly assets and population. I find this out of touch. A lot of families that, not that they want to keep their family home, if a lot of the elderly, well, they will try to reverse mortgage as much as possible. In the overseas countries, well, it's a family concept, then their property aren't expensive as in Hong Kong. So they don't want to put their property to reverse mortgage because they want to put a roof over their head for the future generations. As a poverty alleviation measure, or regard them as asset-rich income poor, I think this is pretty far from reality. We need to be realistic that we can't take the property into account. They have to. It much depends on how much they actually spent. So the OALA and the OA have proven to be a failure. So how do we government resolve the elderly poverty problem? So we have an institutions, or about half of the elderly can fall under the CSSA, on the OALA, as well as the higher OALA, and so on. This will help to supplement the income of these groups. And under the CSSA regime, the calculation is based on the basic necessity as well, the income level gap as well to offer a living supplement. So why do we have adopted standards for different household size for their basic survival needs? So you might have all other views on CSS8 for where we can improve on. So for example, frequently touched on will be the rent allowance, and recently CCF we have a new pilot. And they will actually pay about 50% of the rent. We have to review that we can really help the CSA recipients. So for Dr. Kwok's mentioned the reverse mortgage, I don't have figures at hand, but overall speaking, we can see a better reception. This is an option for, so there's no one perfect option. Another way will be under the life annuity scheme that could help a lot of the elderly as well. So according to our studies, taking into account the cash benefits for the government, there are two major groups. One is the elderly, another group will be the low-income families. So while we're offering the LIFA, then, and while we want to improve the OALA, that's because that is show the findings of the survey. And for the lag, we only launched this measure this year. In the short term, we're not able to see any instant results to demonstrate the effectiveness. Chairman, I asked that for those families who need to live in private housing, the government can calculate their basic living standards in order to help them. No matter if they are eligible for the WFA. So if they're not working, would you just leave them to die? They've not reached to the CSA eligible. However, they're not unable. They're not living. So so at CSS you're looking at the absolute income. However, you haven't exclude the rent from the income. So currently the CSA divided into two parts. One is the living necessities, for example, is standard allowance and the extra allowance. So overall, we look at the family combination, whether any elderly, their health conditions, and if they have a high degree of disability, the CSSA amount will increase. If the income is lower at a certain level, the CSSA will provide a supplement. For the low-income household and the single-parent household, or the elder, they are have income. However, the income not able to meet their basic necessities. So the CSA will come into supplement. As for the rent issue, usually speaking, for the PRH, the sufficient allowance. So we all know about the situation in the private market. So we're exploring ways that how do we help with that. Where the rent allowance is not enough to cover their rent expenses in providing a suitable living environment. So that would to wait to see any for long-term measures. Dr. Cho, we don't need to do any trials. Many years ago, we had this practice that the rent allowance will reach to the 90% of the CSS recipients that allow them to cover their rent. So they have set up this like internal. However, they abolished it.
That was in 1998, after the 1998 review. You do not have that anymore. So all you need to do is to go back to that arrangement. Now, you think that if you give them the full subsidy, then the landlords will raise the rentals. Maybe you can leave, say, a 10% cap. So then the incentive to raise rental will be much reduced. You know how to do it. It's just that you are not willing to do it. Let's not argue anymore. It's meaningless. You are now asking people to use food expenses to cover rental expenses. Now, coming back to this poverty line, in 2016, the statistics show that in terms of our overall resource distribution, there is no difference. The poverty rate has slightly risen. There's not been improvement, but the situation is not getting serious either. It's as bad as ever. Close to 20% of households in Hong Kong are poor households, and this is staggering. 1 in 5 households is a poor household. What kind of world is this? Well, Hong Kong is a very poor city. Surprisingly, 1 out of 5 households. Now, before the intervention, they are poor households. Now, after the government has given cash relief, and the poverty rate is 14.7%, is a rise of 0.4%. That's not acceptable either. And what's most regrettable is compared to the previous year, it has risen even. So that means whether it's the LIFA and the OALA, they are not effective in lifting people out of poverty. That is the failure of your policies to intervene. So I am very infuriated that Matthew Cheung, that they would learn a sobering lesson. And the government officials are not the victims. Your policies have failed, and you fail to help the poor families. And at the outset, we've said that these measures were too harsh, and we've asked for universal retirement protection. You didn't want to do it, and then you came up with the OALA. Now, has the elderly poverty rate dropped as a result of the OAL? No improvement at all after such a long period. And then you say that there is a working poor situation, so you came up with the LIFA, and we think that these are too stringent as well. You say that some 200 to 300,000 families will benefit, but ultimately 100,000 only benefit. And the Matthew Cheung said that they are going to review. They have sent a hard lesson. That's a very callous comment. Now, in June, you are going to relax the OALA, and you are going to relax the LIFA again. This is the kind of government we have. You know very well that you are doing it the wrong way, but you insisted on your way. And as a result, the poor families had to suffer. You had to try it out for a few years, you insisted on it, and then your policies failed. And then the poverty rate has risen instead of dropped. Isn't it that the government has failed in its duty? There is a negligence on the part of the government on Matthew Cheung. I was so infuriated. Let me provide 2 figures. In 2016, for LIVA, it has reduced the poverty rate by 1%, and for OAL is 0.7%. So that's a far cry from our expectations. And in the middle of this year, there will be a higher LIFA allowance as a result in the middle of this year. And then in the last year's policy address, we have proposed a number of measures to improve LIFA, and now we're calling it the Working Family Allowance, which hopefully can effectively reduce poverty rate. Well, the government officials are there to stay in the government, and they would not be worried because they have pension, and irrespective of whether the poverty rate is rising or dropping, the elderly poverty rate is still on the high side. I've just sent a letter to the CS4A to ask for a report on the poverty situation among the disabled. That was last done in 2013, and then I got a reply from them. They will wait till 2020 before they conduct another study. You are not too eager to work on that, but then say you are very keen and anxious to get, say, co-location arrangements and the national anthem legislation passed. You procrastinate on issues relating to the disabled? Why do we have to wait for 7 years before you work on another study on the disabled poverty situation? I don't think they can give you an answer. And then we have Dr. Quat, Vice Chairman, Mr. Leung Yo-chung, and myself. There will not be a second round of questions. So can I ask the ENS department to take the question on poverty among the disabled? For the study on the disabled poverty situation, please understand this. In terms of collecting information on the disabled, there is some sensitivity involved, especially for the intellectually impaired, those suffering from mental problems and so on. When we do this study, we need extra people to help out, and we have to provide adequate training for the people. And it also takes a long time as well. So the latest plan is that around 2019 to 2020, we will conduct this survey on the disabled. It's too late, Chairman. Well, they are saying it's a technical problem, a training problem. Hong Kong people don't know how to conduct a survey among the disabled. How laughable. So that's what the Assistant Commissioner said. Dr. Quat, the DAB supports the government formulating a poverty line. Now, once we have the poverty line, at least we have a measurement tool, and then we can come up with targeted measures to help those in need. But as I stated in paragraph 9, there are 3 constraints, limits to the poverty line, especially in relation to the elderly. If you just look at their income and not their assets, will there be a blind spot here? So does it mean that for all the elderly or who have retired, they would definitely fall into under the poverty line as the population ages? The poor population will only go up and not get down. Without in-depth analysis, you just present the poverty line situation, then we'll be seeing an incessant rise in the number of poor population in Hong Kong, and that actually is not the reality, and that can't help the government come up with targeted measures either. So what will the government do about this? Any measures to help deal with the limitations? I also agree with the Secretary saying that we should help the elderly to get a stable income, and that would help them improve their quality of living. So the reverse mortgage is a very good measure. But then a lot of old people with high assets do not know much about this. Should the government step up publicity on this? Now, also the life annuity schemes, there has been a lot of overwhelming response from the community, and elderly people are interested. When you work on it, if you are going to adopt approach where people have to draw lots and so on, that won't be helpful. So please do it in an extensive way, as long as the elderly are eligible, or rather, as long as the elderly have the amount that they can join, then that would be good. All right. Life annuity scheme, reverse mortgage. Recently, we've put a lot of APIs on TV to help people understand how reverse mortgage and life annuity scheme can help the elderly. So when the life annuity scheme is launched, we're providing a lot of information to district elderly centers to enhance the elderly's understanding on how they can have a stable source of income through this. Now, initially, the HKMA, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, said that the limit would be $10 billion. But then the HKMA said that if there is a keen demand, they will consider raising the amount, but they don't have the specific figures. They will bear in mind the response in the future. You haven't answered my question on the blind spot, so-called blind spot in relation to poverty line. Now, as I said, as the number of retirees is increasing and at a much faster pace in the future too, before the government intervenes, there will be a pressure on the number of population, because because of this, we have to promote reverse mortgage and life annuity scheme to assist the elderly to turn their assets into stable income. What I'm saying, Chairman, is if you adopt the your announcement approach, say there is a population of 1 million and 1 in 5 households will be poor household, that what Dr. Zheng said will appear, and people will be accusing the government of being unscrupulous, and no matter what you do, the number will only rise. I hope that you can put forth a more targeted approach in announcing the figures. Don't give us some ballpark or rough figures. You are not being targeted here. So no matter how much you do, you will be slammed. So can there be a better way of announcing the figures? Now we give you all the figures in a comprehensive way. We have given you the changes after, say, intervention by the government. But people would just love to look at the figures before the government intervenes and then accuse the government of not doing anything. That's, of course, the case. So we understand the difficulties. People just love looking at figures which are more extreme in a way. And now, if you take into account the non-direct intervention by way of public rental housing, we have set that out in the paper, and the effect is more or less the same as that brought by the CSSA. So we are giving you all the figures in a very comprehensive manner, and I hope that everyone, including the legislators here, will look at the whole picture. Just not extract figures here and there, and which doesn't reflect the government's work and policies. And then because the figures you're looking at are just pre-intervention figures, just don't focus on those figures. Please be fair in studying the figures. Actually, the government has laid out all the figures on the table, and we welcome your input on what the government can do, how the government can do more. So we are making public all the figures for you to review the effectiveness of the policies. Just don't extract certain figures which do not really reflect the effectiveness of government work. That won't help. That won't help with our policies. From 2005 to 2007, there used to be a commission on poverty. Now, after that was disbanded, well, actually, one of the major reasons for disbanding, because the people were saying that the Commission on Poverty, the more work it did, the poorer the people got. So they were not really looking at the real situation, and unfortunately, the commission was disbanded. And then in 2012, the government was bold enough to reinstate the commission and then make public all the figures, and the figures are there for everyone to see. Please be fairer in looking at these figures. Secretary, well, you are talking about the technical points. Of course, if you look in depth at the figures, you will understand the reality. But then it's easy to chant slogans, right? 1 in 5 households is a poor household. That is a slogan that people can readily chant. So, and there is also another slogan: 1 out of 4 elderly people in Hong Kong will be a poor one, and that will be misleading. to Hong Kong people and dent Hong Kong's image and reputation. So we are in a dilemma here, a predicament here. No matter how much you do, that will be the problems here. So can we adopt a more targeted approach in presenting the figures which reflect more the reality?
Vice Chairman. So, Secretary, before the policy intervention, we have 1.3 million, and then after intervention, we have about slightly under 1 million of poor population. That isn't anything honorable. So, and then you said that you're not able to see what we have done. For those who are seeing the live webcast, do we have a lot of poor people in Hong Kong? Yes. So now that having criticism of the poverty line is being out of touch, so just accuse you of being make the nice to, and for the post intervention they can try to put the figure at under 1 million. So after intervention, the figure is still rising. So after excluding the public housing, and we still have about 900-something thousand people. This is nothing honorable. I know that the government has done a lot, and for the Lao FA ineffective, and for the no universal retirement protection, just admit it. And for the poor people who are struggling, what can you tell them? So there's 31.6 poverty rate, and for 2015 you have 29,000 poor elderly. We're not simply cherry picking the numbers to go. So maybe you claim that there were problems caused by previous administration, and now you have put your mind right to it. We know that somebody is working on it, and we know that you need to do something, and yet with the poor population has not decreased. It's probably have more to do with how you announce the figures. Instead of playing the numbers game, so why is their poverty line being out of touch? So some organizations advocate for the basic subsistence living protection line. So for income under $4,000 that we can import. So two people income for $90 to $100. How much departing are you from day-to-day reality? So for 4,000 you classify as poor. What happens if you make $4,500 or $5,000? So our discussion, we are being sincere. We very much hope the government, they hope that in setting up this poverty line, and now and you claim that after intervention they can see some results. So how can we expand the number of beneficiaries so that the poor will not get poorer, and those who we can't just chant slogans. So I'm sure the Secretary of own personal feelings. Well, you can't say that this is impeccable. So the LAFA after Paul and so on is still 1 million. You can't just say at the figures before the intervention. I want to listen from the Secretary. So I just responded that the effectiveness of the LIFA and of the OALA, we see that we need to be a step up. So this year for the Life LFA, well, from 1st of April, there will be the overhaul, so that for the 30-something household will be expanded into 100,000 household. For the OALA, we hope to assist the elderly and old income. That's why we set the higher OALA. We see that by the middle of this year, when this is launched, those who be eligible, there will be about 0.4 million people elderly. So that will so whether the poverty line will be out of touch, you can look at the figures. For a 6-person household, the poverty line is set at $20,000. By 2009, the line was set at $13,000, so the increase of $7,000. well, due to the rise in income that led to the rise in the poverty line, so for those without income, especially the elderly, that their likelihood of falling below the poverty line has increased. It has more to do with more elderly poor. It's just so we have the phenomenon that because the poverty line is dynamic. And I explained the 6-person household case sold for the 3-person household be at $9,000 rising to $15,000. So I see that a staggering increase, and that would statistically that would lead to more people classified as poor. As for whether we've done enough, otherwise would not reform the LIFA, or would not have launched the OALA. Well, these measures we can help the 400,000 elderly just to receive $900 more per month. As for LIFA, we'll have also increased the allowance. We hope to increase by over 70,000 households to qualify for the WFA. So the Secretary said illustrated. So now that there is so far reality, I think the criticism is justified. So that we have a lot of policies that have lost being not effective for the 2-person household $9,000. You can't even afford a rental in the private market. After paying the rent, you don't have much money left. I know that the line is dynamic, like you said, like the organization advocated for the subsistence living protection line. So we can look at it for a basic expenditure. So a survey was done. About 70% of private housing are living on, let's say, not able to meet or make ends meet. If you are having sober less, you should apologize to the elderly poor, or you claim that this is nothing honorable. Please don't focus too much on how you interpret the numbers. Mr. Liang Yucheng. So in drawing up the poverty line, I found it quite strange that why this government drawing up the poverty line, because as they claim that it is not for the alleviation purposes. So it's not for alleviation. What's the point? The Secretary said today that there used to be 1.3 million persons, and now there's 995,200 people. So only 4,000 people short of 1 million. Those that considered ideal. I didn't say ideal. You claim that the number has already fallen. So what's the real purpose of this poverty line? At least you can tell us the situation in the public and whether the government will work to improve this. So how can we improve the extreme purpose? That's the point. So the poverty line is how you decide the poor population without any actual effect. So that's why I had really questioned that there's no indicators to go along with the poverty line. So under poverty line, what is the considered as ideal proportion falling under? Otherwise, it's all pointless. So for the we came that one drop to 1 million enough. Do we have the next target? So now that we have HALA and WFA and so on, so what? So for the 990,000 people, so we have a slight improvement. However, is that your real goal? Can I ask the administration, why wouldn't you set up a KPI or a target besides the population goal? How about the quality of life indicators? So you claim that it's only an income-based poverty line. It cannot show the expenditure pattern or any potential challenges. So you have set up the poverty line so line. Would you consider reviewing the poverty line? Would you review on its purpose so that you can make sure that the measures will be more targeted? Chairman, I can only reiterate that the major function of the poverty line that is to help us analyze the poverty situation so as to review the effectiveness of for the alleviation in government measures and to see for room for improvement. For the example I cited, for example, that was launched the higher OALA, and why do we consider launching LIFA? Because the poverty line help us to analyze as a tool. And currently, a lot of the welfare measures are not purely help those under the poverty line. A lot of the measures will be helping about 75% of the poor. For the WFA, you would talk about 60 or 70%. For the books and textbook allowance, you talk about the MHI 90%. If you're forcing the government to set up indicators, you're forcing the government to shift the focus to take care of those under the poverty line, so you can make the numbers nicer. This is never our goal. We never package the number in a nice way, otherwise we will not be subject to such criticism. That was never our objective. Now that we set up such an indicator, so that we talk about which led to displacement. If you, so that will only tackle for those under the poverty line. When the rise of income level, those at elderly with low income or even no income, the population, together with the aging population, would let more of the elderly fall under the poverty line. So that's why we say that why we're trying to promoting the reverse mortgages and the lifetime annuity. So if you're willing to look at these figures, so you will look at these figures fairly. So after the intervention, there's still under 0.33 million falling under the poverty line. That we have provided analysis in the report. When you ask the elderly whether they have an economic need, for the, taking out those who are already receiving CSSA, they'll receive $6,000 a month, and there are only about 42,000 elderly who have the economic need instead of 0.33 million. These are very transparent. If you're willing to look at it, and those elderly with economic need, about 57% are receiving the OALA. So it shows that the OALA is not able to assist the elderly. That's why we're setting up the higher OALA. So that came about after we performed such analysis that aiming for policy improvement. So we talked about the 2016 figures at the moment. Next, my question. Last night we're not able to sleep too well, and we're quite tired, and yet we managed to arrange a petition that is a joint meeting for the low-income family protection. They claim that the poverty line is just a hollow line. So the hollow is on two fronts. One is the abstract, another one now this poverty line is set too low. Like the Secretary have said, let me reiterate that for a one-person household, the poverty line is at $4,000, and two is 9,000 people, and the three-person $1,500, 18,000 people, and then six household is 20,000. Even though the Secretary claimed there's a substantial increase, and yet this figure is still too low. I can't imagine someone classified as poor if they make $4,000.
The first problem with this line is that the criterion was too stringent, and the other question is vague. So a lot of fellow members have asked about the relationship between poverty alleviation measures and poverty line. Someone have talked about the indicators. They said that is not an indicator. Then if there is an indicator set or target set, there will be a displacement result. We've seen a lot of poverty alleviation measures launched, but what are the relationship with the poverty line? Have they borne that in mind, the poverty line in mind when they drew up the measures? The third point is we are discussing the review of the poverty line today. The poverty line has been was set 5 years ago, and there has never been a review. So hence the many questions raised by members. I think that we should review it in this particular direction. Well, some members refer to drawing up different lines. In my perspective, I think we should look at the expenditure to come up with a poverty line and also the subsistence living protection line. Just don't look at the income, but rather the expenses. For an average person in Hong Kong, how is his expenditure situation like? For an average person, how is his life like? And then if, say, if his expenditure is below 50% of the average person's, and then that person is considered a poor person. So that's how we should review the poverty line. And the last point, as mentioned by the Vice Chairman, we should not be just discussing the figures. We should look at the cases of real people. On the 24th of March, there will be a summit of the Commission on Poverty. But I wonder, well, many of the attendees will be, say, representatives from organizations, representatives from business sector, but they are just representatives. And the poor people themselves are not represented normally in this kind of summit. No matter how heated the discussions are, the poor people will stay poor. The community is organizing an alternative summit on the 25th of March. A location, a venue has been identified for the different sessions for that date. Different poor people will share their stories and share their proposed solutions. Maybe their solutions don't sound good to you, but I think this is a very good and meaningful summit. And I think the government's summit can take reference from discussions in the alternative summit. So maybe I don't need an answer or response from you, but if you would like to respond, please do so. Okay, I don't have anything more to say, thank you. So that's it for this item. We've gone over time. I'm so sorry, Dr. Zhang. Now, let's move on to the next item. Thank you very much for coming, the government team. The next item is setting up 2 new contract residential care homes for the elderly and 2 new daycare centres for the elderly at a land sale site of Kai Tak Development, Kowloon. The government has submitted a paper. On this item, we still have the Secretary and Ms. Pang, Assistant Director of Social Welfare, Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Kenneth Wu from SWT, and the PAS from Labour and Welfare Bureau, Ms. Stella Zhang. Welcome. So, Secretary, please walk us through the paper. I think it's a rather straightforward paper. We hope to seek the support of the Welfare Services panel to set up subsidized RCHEs at 2 land plots to be sold off. We have to continue to strive for more land supply, more plots for us to build RCHEs. So we want to secure your support. the construction costs will come out of the lotteries fund, and if we've got the green light from you, we will proceed to talk to the Development Bureau to set out to take things forward. In this budget, we said that we will increase certain subsidized services. But maybe you think that the number is not good enough. We are well aware of that. We'll try to increase the RSHEs and also community care services as much as we can. That's all I want to say. Those who would like to ask a question or make a comment is Mr. Poon Xiaoping and Dr. Fernando Zhang. 4 minutes each. Mr. Poon. Chairman, I support this proposal. Indeed, we should increase RCHEs and daycare centers expeditiously. You said that they will only be able to provide service starting 2024. And there is a long waiting list. Some 38,000 people are on the waiting list. Can we speed things up for these two RCHEs? And in the Annex 2, 30 sites earmarked for the construction of RCHEs have been listed. I would like to follow up. Apart from this particular site, there are 29 others. How is the timeline like? Do you have a specific timetable to take forward work on these 29 sites? Secretary, as you are aware, we are selling land to private developers, and they will be responsible for constructing the RCHEs, and that is actually much faster than the government identifying land ourselves to build such RCHEs. As I said earlier, well, some of the projects take 8 years. That's considered a fast a project. Some others last as much as 10 years or more. So through such land sale programs, we hope to complete the work in a relatively shorter span. And this is a very optimistic projection, 2024. Is already optimistic? Yes. Now, going by experience, for some of two projects took 7 to 8 years. So, it's already quite fast. And what about the 29 projects? Do you have a specific timetable? Ms. Pang, please. For the remaining projects, we will proceed with them in different periods. In the 2017-18 up to 2024-25, different projects will be completed. Can you be more specific? 29, as mentioned by the member. In Annex 1, we do have the year in which they will be completed. You have Annex 2. Well, next time maybe you can add in the timeline because you've got the 29 here already. Say for Eastern District Lake King Road, there will be 200 places. Can you give me exactly the date for the completion of the project? Can you add a column to the right of the table as estimated completion year? Well, not exact date, maybe completion year. Yes, we can add in the information when projects are proceeded with in the future. Yes, for the 29 projects. Mr. Poon hopes that you can give us a paper after the meeting, adding in the estimated year of completion. In Annex 2, you can notice a pattern for projects which are more definite. They are actually situated within public housing estates, and for projects which have already commenced already. So the program can be more definite. But if you say projects in Saiwan Hall, which involves the government itself, well, it's not so certain or definite. That's a common phenomenon. For Saiwan Hall in particular, after 2 weeks after I assumed office, I have inquired about this leaking road project and the progress. We want to do it as soon as we can. I also noticed another pattern. Of course, the members will ask you specific dates, and the government will, of course, say that it's difficult to come up with specific dates. That is another pattern that I identified. Please give us supplementary information on the estimated year of completion. Dr. Fernando Zhang, for this private land plots, such requirements are added into. We've all along been supporting such initiatives, and that has been discussed for a number of years. We hope that this will not be done just on an ad hoc basis, and the decision was just not made on, say, political considerations. You should have a system. You should have a regime. So in the future, whenever land plots you sell, you should come up with a standard set of requirements to ask the developers to provide for community welfare facilities. That can also help the residents who are going to move in to those land plots. That would also enhance the attractiveness of the property development. And regrettably, the government has not been doing this systematically. So, Secretary, would you liaise with the Development Bureau on this? Or maybe even talk to the chief executive. You should come up with a formal policy on this after the meeting in relation to the planning of private plots. Please build in some sort of welfare facilities. Provide us with a policy paper after the meeting. Now, in the past, such kinds of facilities are usually hidden in their location, so to speak. There may be RCHEs, daycare centers in the housing development. You couldn't actually. It's difficult to locate them. The property developers are very good and trying to stuff them into some hidden locations and so on. I get worried. Is this something shameful? Are these facilities which would have bad consequences on the property development? No. So should we let the developers have the say on the locations of these facilities? Maybe their access they will share the same access with, say, the goods lifts of shopping arcades and so on. So I'm not sure how this is going to be done for this particular project. I'm just worried that they will repeat what's been done in the past. So in terms of the design, does the government have any say? Now we are going to pay for it, the construction cost, or the construction cost, not the developer. We are paying for it, but if the developers can call the shots on the location of these facilities, then that's inappropriate. Now, as for this 200 place RCHE, wow, we've been fighting tooth and nail for the RCHE to be designed more like a home. Now, we are still building the old style RCHEs, but in terms of the design, can you do better? Now you want to provide as many places as possible, but then, well, wouldn't you want to design it like a small home setting so that people who are going to live there will not have the feeling that they are living in a prison, like living in a prison? Now, 4:6 ratio, 60% have to be subsidized and 40% self-financed. And elderly people, well, there are some 38,000 people on the list, and for this financial year, some 500 new places will be added. So every year, 6,000 elderly pass away while they are waiting for a place. I don't know what the figures are like this year. So we've been repeating ourselves all the time on these points, and I wonder when the SWD will heed our views. Now, from the policy and the planning perspective, the first thing to do is to revise the Hong Kong planning standards and guidelines, and we're working on this together with the Development Bureau. And the standards are being discussed, and we are very eager to do that. Now, once we've got the revised HKPSG, then once in the future when we review the shortfall in every district, then when we sell land and when we plan for the new development area, we can provide for the elderly services at the very initial stage of planning.
These two projects, because the location, they take a larger footprint, so it's suitable for the RCHEs and daycare centers. That's why we managed to set up this homes with 200 places each. It's already hard to locate these facilities in projects. In some of the facilities is quite hard to locate. I have to keep asking for directions. So one of the developers concerned that where would they put the entrance to these homes? For a larger RCHEs, would there be a lot of ambulances or corpse collection vehicles? So to the public, they will have their own opinion. So on this, the SWD will take part in the consultation. We just don't give a free rein to the developer. As for the smaller scale residential homes, though there have been discussion in Hong Kong, so how do we implement it? That will take time to tour, because they have design and deployment considerations. I believe that the small scale home model will incur a higher cost. However, we will look into it as well. I hope that in the future, the design of these homes, maybe for the RCHEs, they may have a 200, 300 halls. There could be a separate and break up into smaller units to enhance the feeling of home. And we hope we need to do some pilot project as well. For the RCHEs, the design is very similar to hospital wards. So that is from the efficiency as well as the space constraints. However, we hope to catch up the shortfall in spaces, and we can also see that we can overhaul design, because for the carers and the carees, their satisfaction will increase. So looking at the foreign literature, we can see there are major advantages. So for us to change the schedule accommodation would take a very long process, and we also need to do some pilot trials on this. And Chairman, there are also insufficient parking spaces. For 200 beds, 2 RCHEs only allocate 1 parking space. I don't think they're able to cope with the demand. Also, have a few words to say. So, to set up the RCHEs and daycare centers, we definitely welcome them. Secretaries, when you said you want to discuss this, of course we're able to incorporate into today's meeting. I want to move the items around. And now that I can see to identify 30 sites for RCHEs, I hope that the developer can feel their social responsibility. They can to build the advance, so that the buyers were already aware that these facilities are already in place. I agreed with Dr. Chung that whether we can regularize to become a framework with discussion with developers, that will be more meaningful than the 30 or 60 sites earmarked for the construction of homes. As for the location of these homes or these welfare service units, this is a long-standing issue. I visited a lot of service units. However, they're rarely easily located. I can cite some examples. For example, in the Kowloon station, it's very difficult to find a rehabilitation power office. So it seems that is a very much a hidden corner in the building. So you have to take a lot of twists and turns to get to a very secluded spot in the Elements Mall. So I noticed that there are a lot of ambulance vehicles and so on. However, you are marginalizing these service units and seem to pick a position towards these welfare units. These are not desirable. However, I heard from the SWD will be consulted in the process. I hope that you can also contribute more instead of a more perfunctory manner. I don't think there are any members objecting to or having any reservations to this proposal. So the welfare panel would agree or endorse this proposal. So please carry out this project expeditiously. And that's the end of this discussion item. And thank you for all the government representatives. Meeting adjourned. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Apologies. AOB, just to for the they have a special meeting on 19th of March of 9:30. There will be for the public hearing with the deputations to discuss the CSSA. And next, I would like to seek the members' views that in May there will be an agenda item to discuss the social service team and new housing estate. I suggested in April that we'll conduct a duty visit for the service units in these housing estates. So at that day, there will be distributing the keys, and we will work with them and how do they promote their services, as well as or a case management. I hope that we can visit under the Welfare Service Center to visit the Untitled estate of Kwun Chong. With the net of objections, that we shall proceed. So that's the end of the meeting, and thank you all.